If you've been following me from the beginning of my channel, then you know that I've already made the Flash from his Superman the Animated Series appearance. If not, he's linked above. The Flash wasn't the only Proto-Justice League member to show up in the series though. We would eventually see the likes of Dr. Fate, Kyle Rayner's Green Lantern, and Aquaman in the latter half of the show. In a first for my channel, we'll be making all three of them in one video. The first two I mentioned were made before I started filming my work, so they'll be brief. After, we see an almost full look at Arthur Curry. He too got started before filming, but you'll be able to see about half of his process. Let's look at his recipe. Of all the fish in the DC Collectibles sea, there are probably a few different ways you could make this guy. I went with using a TNBA Batman torso on an anti-fire suit Batman pair of legs, topped with a modified version of an enlarged head cast of a Hasbro TNBA Bruce Wayne head. I tell you where it came from, but the guy grabbed my money last time and held on to my final requests a few years ago, and I wouldn't want you to get scammed too. Oh, and you'll need a belt from the DC Direct Justice League animated Aquaman to make things a little easier. I had one left from making my STAS Orion, but that's a video for another time. With all of that sorted out, let's dive in on his modifications. I mentioned starting on him before filming, and the main part I didn't record was the dremeling he needed, but I'll show clips from other recipes where I modified the same or similar parts. You'll want to dremel off Batman's symbol, neck ring, and 2 of the 3 gauntlet spikes on either arm. We'll be able to use his 3rd spike as Aquaman's main point to his glove. For his legs, we need to get rid of the fire suit shin armor pieces, and everything else is fine since they're just plain legs otherwise. Lightly dremel all areas on your low setting and then sand everything down. For his sculpting portion, mix up some of your 2-part epoxy and smooth out the area around his neck as well as his chest line and his gauntlets. Do the same where you took the shins down and let all of that dry. While you wait, you can start modifying the head. I just realized this portion is a little worthless if you don't know where I got the head. Again, be forewarned that you might get stiffed, but look up Glassman Customs for the Bruce Wayne head if you want to risk it. I looked into it a little more and I see the popular opinion is that this guy is a con man, so good luck. The 2 main differences I see between Arthur's model and Bruce's model are the hair and the length of his face. Dremel the hair down a little to replicate his slick back look, sand it, and then add any epoxy if you dremeled too far. Speaking of epoxy, you'll want to add just a little bit to his chin to extend it down some. I started with too much, but you can always dremel and sand it back. Coming back to his body, we need to add his wide shirt collar rim. Mix a thin roll, push it down, and smooth it in. Now we come to the fins on his calves. These will be a bit tricky because in order to retain articulation at the calf swivel, you need to leave a small gap between the fin and the body. Using epoxy would be a little too difficult for the gap to remain small, and the fin itself would be tough to keep very thin. Mine also snapped right off the first time I tried turning the calves. So what can we do? I'm turning to one of my favorite secret weapons, figure bubble plastic. This will allow us to be as thin and precise as possible, solving both issues. As with any plastic or rubber addition I make, I like to start with a paper prototype. This conserves on wasting the more expensive final material. You can run through as many revisions as you need and it will behave in a very similar manner to your end material. Place your figure down on paper and sketch your shape. Cut it out and do a test fitting. If you're happy with it, transfer your piece to the plastic by tracing around and cutting that out. If not, make changes until you're satisfied and make another copy. We can glue both these fins just above the swivel and then let the bottom tail turn freely with the leg above. Now we can splash some paint on. Aquaman is about as straightforward as it gets when it comes to paint colors. Solid orange shirt, solid green pants, green gloves, yellow belt and hair, and then the usual skin color, eye whites, and black detail lines. So altogether, 6 paints are all you will need to bring Arthur to life. I'll start by priming him with 1 coat on each side and then go right into his orange shirt after those dry. I'll move up to his yellow hair while that dries, then move down to his green pants. Then apply a few coats of peach for his skin on his neck and face. Go back in and do multiple thin coats of each color to avoid brush strokes, and then clean up any edges with smaller brushes. For the black line details, I painted on thin bits of black paint, but these days I'd use a couple sizes of these incredibly handy fine point markers. Draw or paint the lines on his stomach and then his face and hair. The last thing is that shine on his belt, and done. Fantastic! Time for pictures. You can even add some of the figure art's wave effects around him to give some nice environmental effects and then put him in the display case. From one Justice League member to the next, let's move on to Kyle Rayner's Green Lantern. For Kyle's recipe, I'm turning to my tried and true Gods and Monsters Batman figure for the majority of his body. I'm going to swap out the torso with the Gods and Monsters Superman one because while thin, Kyle's shoulders were drawn fairly wide. Now, whose face does this remind you of? Are you thinking of Nightwing? That's right, he looks like TNBA Dick Grayson with shorter brown hair. Alright, let's get the tools out and get going. There really won't be very much dremeling or sculpting on this guy to get him looking right. First, we'll heat up and remove Nightwing's hair and set it aside. We'll essentially need to recreate the front part of Nightwing's hair, but mirrored. Mix up some epoxy and shape it onto his head to match. Remember, you can always refine your shape with the Dremel later if needed. Down to his torso, he'll need a higher collar all the way around his neck. Much like Aquaman earlier, roll up some epoxy, wrap it around his neck, and smooth it in at the bottom. While that cures, let's go down and Dremel and sand his belt and the stripes off of his thighs. If you couldn't get them super smooth, fill in the lumpiness with some epoxy and smear it in with water. We need to turn his cuffs into simple gauntlets, and luckily, we won't even need to Dremel the old ones off. Just put some epoxy down right over the top and then cut it off 1/2 to 3/4 of the way down his forearm. The last thing to change before painting is to add on his signature Green Lantern symbol to his chest. Start with a ball and push it down into a thin circle. Dremel and sand after curing and then create the inner lantern symbol itself. Okay, finish up with any more light dremeling or sanding needed and we can finish off his transformation. Much like the dremeling and sculpting portion, he doesn't need very much paint either. I picked out a nice shamrock green for his gauntlets, shoulders, and nose cell shading, and then my basic skin color choice, followed by his brown hair and black paint for the rest of the suit. A little white for the eyes and symbol, and he's all done. Wait a minute, he needs a ring. Mix up the smallest amount of epoxy imaginable, and then use only 1/2 of that to put a dot on his right hand. Let it cure. Paint it the same green along with a band around his finger, and then pull out your UV green paint for a neat effect. You'll probably want to paint this under a black light so you can see what you're doing, but we'll basically be painting a very small inverted lantern symbol on the circle of his ring. That'll make for a cool glowing feature to look like his ring is in use. I also found a HeroClix Green Lantern boxing glove and attached it to his flight stand to position behind his hand for a classic look. From Magic Ring to Magic Sorcerer, let's look at how I made my Dr. Fate. Dr. Fate is the last of the future Justice League members who appeared in Superman the Animated Series whom I have yet to show you. Like magic, we'll be able to use the exact same body combo recipe for Dr. Fate now as we just used for Kyle. The only major changes will be his head and hands and the addition of a cape. At the time, I was less confident in sculpting and wanted a character who already had the triangular eyes, and I had a couple of TNBA Joker heads left over, so I used him for a head. For his hands, I wanted to end up displaying him with his signature Ankh teleportation, and that would require outstretched hands. Luckily, the Gods and Monsters Superman had exactly what I needed. For the cape, I found that the Grey Ghost cape would work quite perfectly with some slight modifications. Grab a drink and let's begin. As we did with Kyle, we'll start modifications on Kent's head. Cut off the Joker's nose and pointed hair and then Dremel the hair down overall. Next, Dremel Superman's collar off and then the stripes on his thighs. Fill in with epoxy after sanding and then fill the holes in his torso left from where we took the jacket off. Start to shape the helmet over the head but leave the eye triangles as holes. The helmet of Nabu has a bit of curve to the point at the bottom, so be sure you capture that too. For his belt, we won't have to Dremel it since it has a very similar overall shape. You can put a little epoxy over the opening at the bottom of it and blend it in. Next, he needs much bigger gauntlets with points on both sides. Then he needs little pointed arrowhead-like shapes at the top of what would be his boots. As with sculpting any rings, push some epoxy down thin all the way around his leg, below the knee, and then cut it away to make your desired shape. His cape needs some slight trimming around the neck, and then a big circle will thankfully cover any seams you may create putting it back together. Time to add some color to the guy. Dr. Fate might have a record low number of colors needed for him, especially if you don't do any cell shading. He only needs a blue and a yellow and then very small amounts of white and black. As usual, I'll be doing the cell shading because it falls under my own preference of doing shiny things and metal. For the lighter shading, I'll use this yellow. I kind of made him a mix between his Superman appearance and his later Justice League appearances because I don't think it's worth making two for the subtle design differences, and I like the richness of a Superman look better. Anyway, blue for the main bodysuit, then the darker yellow on his helmet, gloves, belt, cape, and boot tops. If you decide to cell shade, simply look at your reference and paint similar shapes to replicate the reflective look all over his yellow parts. What he lacks in paint variety on his body will make up for with his very unique accessory I wanted to make. I mentioned planning to pose him in his memorable teleportation pose with a glowing Ankh behind him. Like Kyle a few minutes ago, I'm going to achieve that with one of my favorite little features, UV paint. I chose to use a clear piece of acrylic to both light from behind as well as make it easier to draw the shape on and then cover over with paint. What I mean by that is draw your shape on a piece of paper, cut it out, trace it onto the back of the plastic, and then flip it over to paint it. Start with a few layers of white for the main shape, then make simple alternating and layered brush strokes of UV pink and UV yellow. Once you're done, find a flight stand, a black light, and check that out, pretty awesome! That wraps up today's video. Thanks for watching. Drop a like if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more monthly content like this and occasional shorts featuring tips or additional customs. Follow me on Instagram too, as I post a lot of finished customs up there well before these making of videos ever get made. Join me next time for a couple of unique pieces from the episode Harley Quinnade. One a bust and the other a cell shaded color variant. Check out the rest of my catalog of videos while you wait for that next one. Have a good one, and happy customizing!